I'm Melissa Thompson, 28, raised in the polished mansions of Greenwich, Connecticut. My life was a carefully orchestrated symphony conducted by my status-obsessed parents. When I fell for Jake, a talented but poor sound engineer, they orchestrated my marriage to someone suitable instead. At my reception, Mum whispered, "This is where you belong," with that satisfied smile. That's when I grabbed the microphone and changed everything forever. Before I tell you how I turned my wedding day into my liberation day, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you've ever had to stand up to family pressure. Growing up in Greenwich, Connecticut meant living inside a gilded bubble. Our Tudor-style mansion sat on 3 acres of manicured grounds, complete with a tennis court and a pool house bigger than most people's entire homes. From the outside, it looked like paradise. Inside, it was a pressure cooker of expectations. My father, Richard Thompson, wasn't just any investment banker. He was the kind whose name made other bankers straighten their ties and check their portfolios. The grandson of old money and the son of even more, Dad built his own fortune on top of generations of wealth. He measured everything in life by its return on investment, including his children. My mother, Victoria, came from Boston's elite social circles. She was the perfect corporate wife, immaculately dressed, impeccably mannered, and incredibly skilled at using her charity work to advance my father's business connections. Her calendar was filled with galas, fundraisers, and board meetings. When people described her as formidable, they weren't just being polite. From the moment I could walk, I was being groomed. Ballet lessons at 3, piano at 4, French with a private tutor by 5. My childhood wasn't about exploration or joy, it was preparation for the role I was expected to play in society. While other kids had playdates, I had etiquette lessons. My mother would correct my posture at dinner with a light tap between my shoulder blades. "A Thompson woman always presents herself with dignity," she'd say, adjusting my already straight back. Greenwich Day Academy was where I spent my formative years, surrounded by the children of CEOs, politicians, and old money families. Even there, the pressure never eased. My parents expected straight A's, leadership positions, and the right friendships. "Connections made now will serve you for life," my father would remind me, while reviewing my social calendar as seriously as he did his business meetings. I wasn't allowed to attend sleepovers at certain classmates' homes because their parents weren't established enough. One of my closest friends, Zoe, whose father was a successful doctor but first-generation immigrant, was deemed not quite our circle by my mother. I still remember crying myself to sleep after being forbidden from attending Zoe's 13th birthday party. When college applications came around, there was only one acceptable path: Harvard, where 4 generations of Thompson men had attended. My father's study was lined with Harvard memorabilia and family photos in crimson frames. The problem? I wanted Princeton, with its world-class humanities program and documentary film institute. The fight lasted months. Documentary filmmaking? My mother's voice dripped with disdain. "That's not a career, Melissa. It's a hobby for bored housewives." "Princeton is fine for people who couldn't get into Harvard," my father added, not looking up from his Wall Street Journal. In the end, I got into both schools and chose Princeton anyway, my first real act of defiance. I still remember my father's tight smile at my high school graduation when people congratulated him on my Princeton acceptance. "She's always been willful," he'd say, turning it into a character flaw. At Princeton, I thrived. Away from my parents' constant surveillance, I discovered my passion for storytelling through film. I worked on documentaries about everything from environmental activism to profiles of local artists. For the first time, I felt like Melissa, not just Richard and Victoria Thompson's daughter. But even my academic success wasn't enough. My older sister Amanda had set the bar impossibly high. Amanda did everything right: Harvard Business School, marriage to William Chambers, son of Senator Chambers, and a carefully calculated career in arts administration that looked impressive on paper, while giving her plenty of time for the charity circuit. At family gatherings, the conversation always circled back to Amanda's latest achievement. "Amanda and William just bought that lovely summer home in Nantucket," my mother would announce at dinner. "Right next to the Whitneys. the unspoken comparison, hung in the air like heavy perfume. Every holiday break brought the same questions. Was I seeing anyone appropriate? Had I considered switching to a more practical major? Perhaps business or law? Each suggestion came wrapped in concern, but felt like criticism. Despite everything, I graduated summa cum laude with honours in media studies and a certificate in visual arts. My thesis documentary on wealth inequality in college admissions won a university award. My parents attended graduation, of course. Appearances mattered above all else, but their congratulations felt perfunctory. Now that the college experiment is over, my father said as we drove home from Princeton that final time, we should discuss your real career options. I sat in the back seat of his Mercedes, watching the familiar Connecticut landscape replace New Jersey's highways, feeling both accomplished and completely inadequate. I had a prestigious degree, genuine passion, and talent acknowledged by my professors. Yet somehow, in my parents' eyes, I was still falling short. As we pulled into our circular driveway, the mansion looming before us like a judge awaiting my plea, I made a silent promise to myself. Somehow, I would find a way to build a life that was mine. I just had no idea how difficult that would be or what it would cost me. After graduation, I moved to a tiny apartment in Brooklyn with 2 roommates and landed an entry-level position at Panorama Films, a boutique documentary production company. The pay was barely enough to cover my share of the rent, but I was ecstatic to be working in my field. My parents, predictably, were less enthusiastic. Assistant production coordinator sounds very supportive, my mother said during our weekly phone call, making it sound like I'd chosen to be a professional doormat. My father was more direct. Richard Mills's daughter just started at Goldman. He mentioned they're always looking for bright Ivy League graduates. I politely deflected these comments while throwing myself into work. Panorama was everything I'd hoped for, creative, challenging, and filled with passionate people making meaningful films. 3 months into the job, our team began production on a documentary about urban community gardens. That's when Jake Sullivan walked into my life. Jake was brought on as our sound engineer. He arrived on set carrying his own equipment, wearing worn jeans and a faded band t-shirt, his dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. Unlike the polished Princeton men I'd dated, Jake had a rugged authenticity that immediately caught my attention. During our first lunch break, I found him adjusting his boom mic with the focused precision of someone who truly knew their craft. "That equipment looks serious," I commented, offering him a coffee from the craft services table. He looked up, with warm brown eyes and a smile that transformed his serious face. "Built half of it myself. Sound isn't just technical, it's about capturing the soul of a moment." That simple statement revealed more about Jake than he probably intended. Over the next few weeks, I learned his story piece by piece. Raised by a single mother in working-class Baltimore, Jake had been fascinated by sound since childhood. He'd worked odd jobs since he was 16 to help his mum make rent, taught himself audio engineering through library books and YouTube tutorials, and eventually built enough of a reputation to get steady work in film and television. College wasn't in the cards for me, he explained one evening as we shared takeout after a late shoot. But I've probably read more books on acoustic physics than most engineering students. Jake's talent was undeniable. He could capture whispered conversations in windy gardens and transform ambient city noise from distraction to atmospheric enhancement. Directors specifically requested him because he understood storytelling through sound in a way that technically trained engineers often missed. Our professional relationship quickly evolved into friendship, then something deeper. Jake was unlike anyone I'd ever known. Genuine, passionate, and completely unimpressed by status or wealth. When I mentioned my family background, he simply shrugged. "Cool. My mum cleaned houses in neighbourhoods like that, said she could tell which families were actually happy by how they treated their trash cans." "Their trash cans?" I laughed. "Yep. Said the truly rich folks never bothered to bring them in themselves, but the ones who remembered the trash collectors were human too. Those were the ones with real class." For 6 months, Jake and I dated without my parents knowing. We explored New York together, discovering tiny jazz clubs, community art installations, and hole-in-the-wall restaurants with food more delicious than anything served at my parents' country club. For the first time, I was experiencing life without the filter of wealth and status. Eventually, I couldn't keep these two worlds separate any longer. When my parents insisted I attend my cousin's engagement party, I decided to bring Jake as my +1. I spent hours coaching him on what to expect, my father's interrogation style, my mother's passive-aggressive comments, which fork to use for the salad course. "Relax," Jake said, adjusting his borrowed sport coat. "I've recorded audio at the White House. Pretty sure I can handle dinner with your folks." The evening was a disaster from the moment we arrived at my parents' home. My mother's eyes widened at Jake's appearance. Despite the new clothes I'd insisted on buying him, he still looked out of place among the country club set. His handshake was too firm, his accent too distinct, his compliments on the house too genuine rather than casually entitled. During dinner, my father conducted his usual background check disguised as polite conversation. "And where did you attend school, Jake?" he asked, swirling his 20-year-old scotch. "School of Hard Knocks, sir," Jake answered with a smile that wasn't returned. "Started working after high school to help my mum out." My mother nearly choked on her wine. "And your father?" she pressed, already knowing from my earlier explanation that this was sensitive territory. "Never really in the picture," Jake answered evenly. "My mum did the job of both parents." The questions continued relentlessly, about his income, his career prospects, his family background. With each answer, my parents' expressions grew frostier. When Jake enthusiastically described our documentary project about community gardens, my father interrupted. "Interesting hobby, but surely you have plans for a real career path? Something with stability?" Jake kept his composure, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "Actually, sir, I consider storytelling through sound a genuine art form and viable profession. I may not have a trust fund, but I've never missed rent." After dinner, my father took Jake aside for what he called a man-to-man chat. I later learned he'd offered Jake a position at his friend's media company, a more suitable role with better pay that would take him away from production work. The offer came with the clear implication that this would make Jake more acceptable as my boyfriend. When Jake politely declined, explaining he preferred creative independence to corporate security, my father's pretense of civility evaporated. "Young man," he said, loud enough that I could hear from the hallway, "I admire ambition, but you should understand your relationship with my daughter is a temporary phase. Melissa has certain obligations to her family name." By the time we left, the temperature had dropped below freezing, both outside and between us and my parents. In the Uber back to Brooklyn, Jake was quieter than I'd ever seen him. "I'm sorry," I whispered, mortified by my family's behaviour. "Not your fault," he said, taking my hand. "But Melissa, is that really the world you come from? Because it's nothing like the person I know." The next morning, my mother called. "Darling, about last night. Your little friend seems earnest, but surely you understand this isn't going anywhere. The Thompson name opens doors that someone like Jake can't even imagine." "Someone like Jake?" I repeated, anger rising. "You mean someone talented, hard-working and genuine?" "Don't be naive," she snapped, her voice losing its practiced softness. "Your father and I have invested too much in your future to watch you throw it away on some sound technician with no background." The argument escalated until my father got on the line and delivered his ultimatum. "End this unsuitable relationship, or we'll be forced to reconsider your position in this family, including financial support." For the first time in my life, I hung up on my parents. Then I called Jake and asked if I could come over. That night, in his tiny Bushwick apartment with the mismatched furniture and walls covered in vintage concert posters, I made my choice. I would stand by Jake, even if it meant standing against my family. The next day, I emptied my trust fund-supplied checking account, packed my essentials, and moved out of my parents' financial control and into the uncertain territory of genuine independence. Living independently proved harder than I'd imagined. My entry-level salary barely covered necessities, and I quickly learned the real value of things I'd taken for granted, like health insurance and cell phone plans. Jake never made me feel like a burden, but I was determined to pay my own way. I picked up weekend work editing wedding videos and corporate promotions, often staying up until 3 a.m. to complete freelance projects. For 6 weeks, my parents maintained complete radio silence. No calls, no texts, not even their usual passive-aggressive emails with links to career opportunities, a friend mentioned. At first, the silence was liberating. Then, as weeks passed, a lifetime of conditioning began to whisper doubts. Had I made a terrible mistake? Was I truly cut off forever? Just as these thoughts threatened to overwhelm me, my mother reached out. Her message seemed casual, just checking in, hoping I was well. This was followed by occasional texts sharing family news or asking about my work. No mention of Jake or our argument. It seemed like she was extending an olive branch. Mai. Month into this cautious reconnection, my phone rang at midnight. It was my father, his voice uncharacteristically shaken. "Your mother's in the hospital. She's asking for you." I rushed to New York Presbyterian, where I found my mother in a private room, looking pale but alert. The diagnosis was exhaustion and dehydration, serious, but hardly the life-threatening emergency my father had implied. As I sat by her bedside, she squeezed my hand weakly. "I've been so worried about you," she whispered. "The stress of our disagreement, it's not good for any of us." Guilt washed over me. Had my defiance actually made my mother ill? Over the next few days, I visited regularly, sometimes running into family friends who'd just stopped by and seemed surprised, but pleased to see me reconnecting with my parents. During one visit, my mother suggested we try again with Jake. "We may have been hasty in our judgment," she admitted with uncharacteristic humility. "Your happiness matters to us." I was cautiously optimistic when my parents invited us both to dinner at Le Bernardin, my father's favourite restaurant. Jake was reluctant. "They're trying to control the narrative," he warned. "Public place, their territory, their rules." "They're making an effort," I countered. "Isn't that what we wanted?" The dinner was surprisingly pleasant. My father asked thoughtful questions about Jake's sound design process. My mother mentioned a documentary she'd watched on PBS. They seemed genuinely interested in our work and our relationship. As coffee was served, my father cleared his throat. "Melissa, I've been thinking about your career. Bradley Winston at Pinnacle Media is an old friend. He mentioned they're looking for an associate producer. I'd be happy to make a call." I hesitated. Pinnacle produced prestigious documentaries with substantial budgets and award recognition. It would be a major step up from my current position. "That's very kind," I said cautiously. "Just trying to support your passion," my father replied, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. After all, family connections should be used for something worthwhile. The next day, I had an interview at Pinnacle. 2 days later, I had a job offer with nearly double my current salary. Jake was suspicious of the timing. "It's a great opportunity," I argued, "and it's still documentary work, not some corporate sellout position. I just find it convenient that your parents suddenly respect your career choice, now that they can control where you work." Jake responded. Despite his concerns, I took the position. It was a genuine step forward professionally, regardless of how it had come about. What I didn't realise was that it was just the first move in my parents' elaborate chess game. Over the next few months, my parents orchestrated a careful campaign of reconciliation with strings attached. They invited us to social events where Jake was politely included but clearly out of place. At a charity gala, I overheard my mother explaining to her friends that Jake was discovering his potential under my father's mentorship, as though he were a charity case rather than an accomplished professional. At a country club luncheon, my mother cornered me in the ladies' room. "Darling, you know we're trying with Jake, but is this rebellion really worth it? You could have anyone, literally anyone. Charles Winthrop's son just made partner at his law firm, and he always asked about you." "It's not a rebellion, Mother. I love him." She patted my cheek. "Love is lovely at your age. But eventually, you need someone who understands your world. Meanwhile, my father started offering financial assistance in ways designed to remind me what I was giving up. When I mentioned my student loans during dinner, he casually offered to pay them off. After all, he added, family takes care of family, as long as family remembers their responsibilities. The implication was clear. His help came with expectations about my future choices. Jake grew increasingly uncomfortable with my parents' influence. "They're trying to buy you back," he said after my father sent an extravagant gift basket to our apartment, "and they're setting me up to look like the bad guy if I object." I defended my parents, arguing they were making genuine efforts to accept our relationship. But deep down, I noticed troubling patterns. My new position at Pinnacle kept me working late hours, often on projects that required travel, creating distance between Jake and me. Invitations arrived for events where Jake would feel out of place or couldn't attend due to work commitments, making it easier for me to go alone and reintegrate with my parents' social circle. 3 months into this new arrangement, I received a call from Marco, a director friend, asking if everything was okay. "What do you mean?" I asked. I wanted to hire Jake for my new project, but I heard he's unreliable. Something about showing up intoxicated on set. That doesn't sound like him at all. My blood ran cold. Jake had been sober for years after watching alcoholism destroy his father's life. This rumour was not only false, but specifically designed to damage his reputation in an industry built on trust and reliability. Further investigation revealed similar rumours circulating among production companies where my father had connections. Nothing direct enough to trace back to my parents, but the pattern was unmistakable. They were systematically undermining Jake's professional reputation while outwardly supporting our relationship. When confronted, my parents expressed shock and denied any involvement. "Perhaps this is simply the reality of your friend's situation, coming to light," my mother suggested. "Sometimes love blinds us to people's flaws." That night, I repeated the conversation to Jake, still wanting to believe my parents wouldn't stoop so low. His face hardened as I spoke. "Your parents are willing to destroy my career to separate us," he said quietly. "And you're still calling it a misunderstanding." "They're my family," I protested weakly. "And what am I?" he asked. The question hung between us, unanswered, as I found myself caught between two worlds, unable to fully break from my parents' influence, but increasingly aware of their manipulation. 2 months later, my grandmother Eleanor fell seriously ill. Though not as openly controlling as my parents, Grandma Eleanor was the family matriarch whose approval everyone sought. She requested the entire family gather at her estate in Newport, Rhode Island. Despite our strained relationship, I couldn't refuse. Jake understood but declined to join me. "This should be family time," he said, though we both knew the real reason. He'd grown tired of being the outsider my family barely tolerated. Grandma Eleanor's sprawling Victorian mansion overlooked the Atlantic, its grounds perfectly maintained, despite her failing health. As a child, I'd loved visiting her, finding her slightly less rigid than my parents. She let me eat cookies before dinner and read me stories about adventurous women when my mother wasn't listening. When I arrived, she was propped up in her antique 4-poster bed, looking frailer than I remembered, but with the same sharp eyes that missed nothing. "There's my Melissa," she said, patting the edge of her bed. "Come sit with me." Unlike my parents, Grandma Eleanor asked genuine questions about my work and listened to my answers. When I hesitantly mentioned Jake, she didn't immediately dismiss him. "He sounds like someone who knows his own mind," she observed. "I married your grandfather because he had that same quality. Of course, he also came from the right background," she added with a pointed look. Over the next few days, family members arrived, aunts, uncles, cousins, and of course my sister Amanda with her perfect husband and their perfect twin toddlers. Family dinners became a parade of achievements, with my parents proudly highlighting everyone's accomplishments while noticeably glossing over mine. On the third evening, my father called a family meeting in Grandma Eleanor's study. The family, lawyer Mr. Harrington was present with documents spread before him. Grandma Eleanor, assisted by her nurse, sat regally in her armchair. "I've asked you all here to discuss my estate planning," she announced without preamble. "At 92, I'm being practical, not morbid." Mr. Harrington explained the distribution of properties, investments, and heirlooms. When he reached my name, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "For Melissa, there is a special provision," he stated. "The inheritance, which includes the summer cottage in Cape Cod and a trust valued at approximately $3 million, is contingent upon marriage to a suitable partner from an established family, preferably before Eleanor's passing." The room fell silent. My face burned as every eye turned toward me. "This is for your own security," Grandma Eleanor said firmly. "I watched my own sister throw her life away on a charming nobody. When he left her with nothing but debts and 2 small children, guess who had to rescue her? Family money should strengthen family connections, not subsidize poor choices." I sat stunned as the meeting continued around me. Later that night, my parents came to my room. My mother's expression was sympathetic but determined. "Darling, we've been patient with this Jake phase, but now you see what's at stake." My father was more direct. "It's time to make a choice, Melissa. Continue this unsuitable relationship and lose not just our support, but your grandmother's inheritance, or accept reality and secure your future." "This is emotional blackmail," I protested. "This is family responsibility," my father corrected. "We've already started introducing you to appropriate candidates. Alexander Hartford has expressed particular interest." Alexander Hartford was the son of my father's college roommate, a private equity manager with his own plane and a family name almost as old as the country itself. We'd met briefly at charity functions. He was conventionally handsome, impeccably educated, and about as interesting as beige wallpaper. "I'm with Jake," I said firmly. "I love him." "Love doesn't pay bills or maintain position," my mother countered. "You've had your freedom, your authentic experience. Now it's time to take your place in this family." They left me with an ultimatum: end things with Jake permanently and begin dating from their approved list, or be cut off completely, not just financially, but from the entire family. I called Jake that night, tears streaming down my face as I explained the situation. The first time, real anger crept into his voice. "They're buying and selling you like a commodity," he said. "And you're actually considering it. It's $3 million, Jake, and my family. Would you sell your soul for $3 million? Because that's what they're asking." We argued for hours, covering the same ground repeatedly until exhaustion set our words on fire. "If you can't stand up to them now, you never will," he finally said. "And I can't build a life with someone who's always looking over her shoulder for her parents' approval." "That's not fair," I protested. "Neither is asking me to compete with your grandmother's millions," he shot back. The call ended with no resolution. Back in New York, things deteriorated quickly. Jake and I tried to navigate the ultimatum, but each conversation reopened the wound. 2 weeks after returning from Newport, he packed his things and moved out of our apartment. "I love you, Melissa," he said at the door, "but I won't be the reason you lose your family, because you'll resent me for it eventually. And I won't watch you choose money over love because I'll resent you. Either way, we lose." The following weeks passed in a fog of depression. I threw myself into work but found no joy in it. My parents, sensing victory, began orchestrating accidental meetings with Alexander Hartford, at gallery openings, charity auctions, even arranging for us to be seated together at a mutual friend's wedding. Alexander was perfectly pleasant, and clearly briefed on the situation. He never mentioned Jake or pressured me, instead focusing on our natural compatibility and shared background. He sent thoughtful gifts and took me to exclusive restaurants where the staff knew him by name. On paper, he was the perfect match my family wanted. As autumn turned to winter, I found myself going through the motions of dating Alexander, while feeling nothing. When he kissed me goodnight after our 5th date, I felt only emptiness. But I also felt the weight of my family's expectations and the fear of being truly alone. Just before Christmas, at the Thompson annual holiday gala, Alexander proposed in front of 200 guests, including my beaming parents and Grandma Eleanor, who had made the trip despite her health. The ring was a family heirloom, a 5-carat diamond that felt heavier than its considerable weight. With cameras flashing and my mother's warning gaze fixed on me, I said yes. Later that night, alone in my childhood bedroom, I stared at the ring and tried to convince myself I was doing the right thing. I sent Jake a text, the first contact since our breakup. "I'm engaged. I'm sorry. I hope you find happiness." His reply came hours later. "I hope you remember who you really are someday." I cried myself to sleep, the diamond catching moonlight. Through my window, casting fractured rainbows on my ceiling that seemed to mock the brokenness I felt inside. The moment I said yes to Alexander, my mother transformed into a wedding planning machine. Victoria Thompson had been preparing for this day since my birth, and no detail was too small for her attention. She had a vision, a June wedding at Sat. Thomas Church on Fifth Avenue, followed by a reception at the Metropolitan Club, the epitome of old New York elegance. 800 guests, she announced at our first planning meeting, presenting a binder thicker than my college thesis. "We've already secured the date. The Hartfords will handle the rehearsal dinner at Le Bernardin, of course." I sat silently as she outlined my wedding as if I were merely an actress in her production. The dress would be custom Vera Wang. The flowers would be imported peonies and roses in cream and blush. The cake would have 7 tiers and be featured in Vogue. "Mother, don't you think 800 people is excessive?" I ventured. She looked genuinely confused. "Darling, this isn't just a wedding. This is the social event of the season. The governor has already confirmed his attendance." I didn't know the governor. I doubted he knew me beyond my last name and bank account. Alexander seemed content to let our families handle everything. "Happy wife, happy life," he'd say with a practiced chuckle whenever I mentioned feeling overwhelmed. "Our job is just to show up and look good in the photos." That seemed to summarize our relationship, looking good on paper without any real substance. We had pleasant dinners where we discussed safe topics like travel destinations and wine. Preferences. He never asked about my documentaries or seemed interested in my opinions on anything consequential. I was arm candy with the right pedigree, and he was my ticket to family approval. As spring arrived and wedding preparations intensified, I felt increasingly hollow. I went through the motions, dress fittings, menu tastings, endless meetings. With planners and florists, while feeling like I was watching someone else's life. My one refuge was work. At Pinnacle Media, I threw myself into a documentary series about urban renewal, finding genuine purpose in sharing stories of community transformation. It was the only time I felt like myself. 3 months before the wedding. I was rushing through Greenwich Village after a late shoot, when I literally collided with Jake outside a coffee shop. Coffee spilled, papers flew, and suddenly he was there, looking exactly the same yet somehow different. "Melissa," he said, his voice a mixture of surprise and something else I couldn't identify. "Jake, hi." Brilliant conversation, I thought, to myself. He helped me gather my scattered notes, his fingers brushing mine briefly. "How have you been?" "Good. Busy. Wedding planning," I blurted, immediately wishing I hadn't mentioned it. His expression shuttered slightly. "Congratulations again. How about you?" "Can't complain. Just finished sound design for a feature that got into Tribeca, and I'm teaching audio production at NYU now, adjunct position." Pride swelled in my chest. "Jake, that's amazing." We stood awkwardly for a moment before he suggested coffee to replace what I'd spilled. Against my better judgment, I agreed. For 2 hours we talked like no time had passed. Jake told me about his new projects, his mother's health improvements, his small but growing sound studio in Greenpoint. I shared stories about my documentary work, carefully avoiding mentions of Alexander or the wedding. As evening fell, Jake walked me to the subway. "It was good seeing you, Melissa. You look—" He paused, studying my face. "Actually, you look tired. Are you happy?" The simple question hit me like a physical blow. When was the last time anyone had asked me that? I'm fine, I answered automatically. That's not what I asked. Before I could formulate a response, he continued. The Melissa I knew wouldn't settle for fine. She wanted extraordinary. We parted with an awkward hug that lingered a moment too long. That night I couldn't sleep, Jake's question echoing in my mind. Are you happy? The encounter reawakened feelings I'd tried to bury and cast my engagement in harsh light. I began noticing things about Alexander I'd been ignoring. His casual dismissal of service staff, his assumption that money could solve any problem, his subtle but constant reminders of how fortunate I was to be with him. 2 weeks after running into Jake, I discovered something that cracked my carefully constructed compliance. While searching for a document on my laptop, I found emails between my father and several major production companies, including one where I'd applied for a directing opportunity before my engagement. The emails revealed my father had systematically contacted these companies, suggesting I was unstable and going through a phase with my film career. He'd implied I wasn't serious about documentary work and would be leaving the industry after marriage to focus on family responsibilities. I confronted my mother first, finding her reviewing flower arrangements in her sunroom. Did you and Dad sabotage my career opportunities? I demanded, showing her the printed emails. She barely glanced at them. We protected you from distractions. Alexander's family expects a certain type of wife, not someone chasing cameras around homeless shelters. So you've been planning this all along, forcing me to give up my career? No one's forcing you to do anything, she replied calmly. We're simply helping you understand where someone like you belongs. Someone like me? I repeated incredulously. Her expression softened into something almost pitying. Darling, you've always needed guidance. Remember your phase wanting to be a veterinarian? Or when you insisted on public school? You get these notions. Our job is to guide you back to reality. The conversation degenerated from there, with my mother eventually sighing that we could discuss my little hobby after the honeymoon. Though I don't see why you need to work at all, she added. Alexander makes more than enough. I sought out my father next, finding him in his study. Unlike my mother, he didn't bother with pretense. The documentary phase served its purpose, he said dismissively. It gave you something to feel passionate about while we found you a suitable match. Now it's time for adult responsibilities. My career is an adult responsibility. Your career, he said with air quotes, was always temporary. The Hartford connection is permanent. Do you have any idea how many strings I pulled to make this match happen? Alexander had options, Melissa. Many options. So I should be grateful he deigned to marry me. I was nearly shouting now. My father's expression hardened. You should. Be grateful we've secured your future despite your best efforts to sabotage it. That stunt with the sound technician could have ruined everything. Jake has a name, and what we had was real. Real doesn't pay for the life you're accustomed to. Real doesn't maintain social position. The Thompson name opens doors that talent alone never could. I left my parents' house that day with crystal clarity about my situation. This marriage wasn't about love or even compatibility. It was a business merger with my future as the commodity being traded. Yet despite this realization, I felt trapped. The wedding machine was in full motion. Invitations had been sent. Deposits had been paid. Grandma Eleanor had even rallied her health to attend. And beneath it all was the terrifying question, if I wasn't Victoria and Richard Thompson's compliant daughter, future Hartford wife, who was I? With 2 weeks until the wedding, I stood at my apartment window watching the city lights, phone in hand, Jake's number on the screen. I didn't press call. Instead, I texted Alexander that I needed to discuss something important. His response was telling. Can it wait until after the charity gala tomorrow? Mother's counting on our appearance. I put my phone away and continued staring at the city, a plan slowly forming in my mind. June 12th dawned perfectly clear, the weather as carefully arranged as everything else in this production. I awoke in my childhood bedroom, where I'd spent the night according to tradition. My wedding dress hung from a special stand by the window, the morning light making the handcrafted lace glow like something from a fairy tale. A team arrived at 7. Hairstylist, makeup artist, my mother's personal assistant, the wedding planner, and a photographer to capture candid getting-ready moments that had been scheduled in 15-minute increments. I sat quietly as they transformed me into the perfect Thompson Hartford bride. "You look absolutely ethereal," my mother declared when they finished, already dressed in her custom Oscar de la Renta Mother of the Bride ensemble. "Alexander won't be able to take his eyes off you." As the makeup artist applied a final touch of powder, I asked for a moment alone. "Bridal jitters," I explained with a forced smile. Once the room cleared, I took out my phone and sent a text to Jake. "Do you still think about us? About what could have been?" His reply came quickly. "Every day." "If things were different," I wrote, fingers trembling, "if I found the courage to choose differently, would you still want me, even after everything?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Finally, "I've never stopped loving you, Melissa, but you have to choose for yourself, not for me." I stared at those words until my mother knocked, announcing it was time to leave for the church. I tucked the phone into the special pocket the designer had added to my dress and joined my waiting family. St. Thomas Church was a cathedral of wealth and tradition, its Gothic architecture a perfect backdrop for old money nuptials. Through the tinted windows of the vintage Rolls-Royce my father had rented, I could see guests arriving, men in morning suits, women in designer dresses and elaborate hats. Secret Service agents stood discreetly by the entrance, confirming the governor had indeed come to witness this merging of fortunes. My father helped me from the car, adjusting my veil with uncharacteristic tenderness. "You've made us proud today," he said, offering his arm. Inside the vestibule, bridesmaids fussed with my train while the wedding planner gave last-minute instructions through her headset. Through a crack in the massive wooden doors, I glimpsed the packed church, 800 witnesses to a lie. I was about to tell. As the organist began Wagner's traditional processional, I scanned the back of the church and saw him, Jake, slipping quietly into the last pew, wearing a suit I'd never seen before. Our eyes met briefly before the doors closed for my entrance. The next moments passed in a blur. The doors reopened. Hundreds of faces turned. My father's arm guided me forward. With each step down the endless aisle, I felt both more present and more detached, seeing everything with painful clarity. Alexander waited at the altar, handsome in his bespoke tuxedo, a practiced smile on his face. Beside him, his best man, a banking colleague I'd met twice, checked his watch discreetly. My mother dabbed at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, more concerned with how the gesture would photograph than any actual emotion. The ceremony proceeded according to script. The minister spoke of union and commitment. Alexander recited his vows flawlessly, as if presenting quarterly projections to investors. When my turn came, I heard my voice speaking the promised words while my mind screamed in protest. "I do," I said when prompted, the shortest and biggest lie of my life. After the pronouncement and the carefully choreographed kiss, we processed, back down the aisle as husband and wife. Alexander whispered, "You played your part perfectly," as if congratulating an actress on a successful performance. The reception at the Metropolitan Club was a showcase of excess: ice sculptures, champagne fountains, a 16-piece orchestra, and centerpieces that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I moved through cocktail hour in a daze, accepting congratulations from people who knew my name but not my dreams. During dinner, Alexander's father gave a toast celebrating the union of 2 great American families, speaking more about stock portfolios than love. My father followed with practiced anecdotes about my childhood that painted me as a charming but directionless girl who needed the stability Alexander would provide. As coffee and dessert were served, my mother appeared at my side, radiant with satisfaction. "See," she whispered, squeezing my hand too tightly. "This is where you belong. I told you everything would work out once you stopped fighting your destiny." Something inside me finally broke. I stood abruptly, causing my chair to screech against the marble floor. "I'd like to make a toast," I announced. This wasn't in the programme. My mother's smile froze as I walked to the centre of the room where a microphone stood for the planned speeches. Alexander looked mildly annoyed at the deviation from schedule. I took the microphone, feeling surprisingly calm. 800 faces turned toward me expectantly. In the back of the room, I spotted Jake, still watching, his expression unreadable. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," I began conventionally. "It's overwhelming to see so many important people here to witness this union." Approving. Nods all around. My mother's shoulders relaxed slightly. "I've been thinking about what marriage really means," I continued. "Is it a merger of assets? A strategic alliance? A social expectation fulfilled?" The nodding slowed. My father straightened in his chair. "Or should it be something more? Something authentic and honest?" I looked directly at Alexander. "Something built on actual love and mutual respect." The room had gone completely silent. Even the servers had stopped moving. "The truth is," my voice grew stronger, "I don't love Alexander, and he doesn't love me. This marriage isn't a union of hearts, but a business transaction arranged by our families." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Alexander's face flushed dark red. "My parents orchestrated everything, sabotaging my previous relationship, undermining my career, using my grandmother's inheritance as leverage. They created this perfect tableau of Upper East Side happiness while systematically crushing any independence I showed." My mother was half standing now, her face contorted with fury and embarrassment. My father made a cutting motion across his throat, signalling me to stop. "I've spent my entire life trying to be the daughter they wanted instead of the person I've smiled through their criticism, accepted their manipulation, and nearly married a man who sees me as a suitable accessory to his lifestyle." I looked directly at my parents. "But I can't do it anymore. I won't do it anymore." I removed the massive diamond ring and placed it on the table beside me. "I'm sorry, Alexander, but I can't marry you. You deserve someone who wants the life you're offering. That person isn't me." I turned back to the stunned audience. "I apologize to all of you for the inconvenience. Please enjoy the very expensive dinner and cake my parents have provided. Consider it compensation for witnessing the moment I finally found my voice." With shaking hands, I replaced the microphone and walked toward the exit. As I passed Jake's table, I paused. "Coming?" I asked softly. He stood without hesitation and took my hand. Together, we walked out of the Metropolitan Club and into the warm June evening, leaving chaos erupting behind us. The first hours after walking out of my wedding reception were surreal. Jake and I wandered through Central Park in absurd formal wear, me in a $75,000 wedding gown, him in his one good suit. We talked until dawn on a park bench near the reservoir, reconnecting and planning in equal measure. "I can't go back to my apartment," I realised. Everything there was paid for by my parents. "Then come home with me," Jake said simply. "We'll figure it out together." The immediate aftermath was as dramatic as you might expect. My parents' lawyer served me with papers demanding return of the wedding dress and all gifts. The New York Post ran a gleeful story about the runaway Thompson bride that was picked up by national outlets. My mother sent a single text. "When you're ready to apologise for the humiliation you've caused, we'll discuss terms for your return to the family." I didn't respond. Alexander, surprisingly, was the most decent about the whole thing. He called once, not to berate me but to admit he'd also had doubts. "I wanted my father's approval more than I wanted a wife," he confessed. "Maybe we're not so different." He handled the annulment proceedings quietly and even sent a surprisingly thoughtful note wishing me well. My parents were less gracious. As promised, they cut me off completely, financially, socially, and emotionally. My credit cards were cancelled. My position at Pinnacle Media mysteriously became redundant after a call from my father. My grandmother revised her will, removing me entirely. Living with Jake in his small Greenpoint apartment was a crash course in real-world economics. His one-bedroom walk-up was the size of my former closet, with thin walls and temperamental, plumbing. For the first time in my life, I worried about making rent and calculated the cost of groceries. I found work wherever I could: production assistant gigs, freelance editing, even a stint as a barista at an independent coffee shop. Each paycheck felt more satisfying than any trust fund deposit ever had, because I'd earned it myself. Jake never made me feel like a burden, even when I clearly was. "This is what real partners do," he said when I apologized for bringing financial stress into his life. "They carry each other through the hard times." The hardest adjustment wasn't financial, but social. Friends from my previous life disappeared, unwilling to risk my parents' displeasure by association. Holiday invitations vanished. Former colleagues suddenly couldn't find time for coffee. I understood then how effectively my parents had constructed my entire social world, and how completely they could dismantle it. But as old connections fell away, new ones formed. Jake's friends, other artists, musicians, and filmmakers, welcomed me without judgment. They taught me that friendship based on genuine connection was more valuable than any society alliance. 6 months after the non-wedding, Jake and I were having dinner with his sound engineer colleagues when Lucia, an independent director, mentioned needing help with a documentary about women entrepreneurs in immigrant communities. "I know it's a step down from Pinnacle," she said cautiously, "but we have funding and distribution through PBS." "It's not a step down," I replied. "It's exactly the kind of meaningful work I've wanted to do." That project became my lifeline, back into filmmaking. Working with limited resources forced me to be more creative, more authentic in my storytelling. The women we profiled, who had built businesses from nothing, often while facing language barriers and cultural obstacles, put my own struggles into perspective. Jake and I began collaborating professionally as well as personally. His sound expertise complemented my visual storytelling instincts. We saved enough to rent a tiny studio space in Bushwick, where we founded Thompson Sullivan Productions, a small but determined documentary company focused on stories of transformation and resilience. Our first independent project was deeply personal, a documentary exploring the psychological impact of family expectations and the courage required to defy them. I interviewed others who had broken from family pressures, from ultra-Orthodox, Jews who left their communities to corporate heirs who chose artistic paths. Weaving my own story throughout, I created something raw and honest that felt cathartic to complete. When Breaking Expectations was accepted to a small film festival, I experienced a professional pride unlike anything I'd felt before. This wasn't success handed to me through connections. It was earned through genuine talent and hard work. Not everyone from my past disappeared. My cousin Emma reached out secretly, admitting she'd always felt suffocated by family expectations, too. A few former classmates who had their own complicated family dynamics reconnected. My mother's sister, Aunt Beth, who had always been the family rebel, called to say she was proud of me. On the 1-year anniversary of my non-wedding, I received an unexpected email from my father. No apology, just a business-like notification that some personal items from my childhood remained in storage at their home, available for collection, if I wished. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was acknowledgement of my continued existence, a small crack in the wall of silence. I arranged to pick up the items when my parents were travelling. The housekeeper, Maria, who had known me since childhood, hugged me tightly at the door. "They miss you," she whispered. "They're too proud to say it, but they do." Among the carefully boxed belongings was a surprise: my grandmother's antique camera, the one she'd used in her brief secret career as a photographer before marriage ended her artistic pursuits. With it was a note in her shaky handwriting. "For Melissa, who had the courage I lacked, make beautiful things." That evening, Jake and I sat on the fire escape of our apartment, watching the sunset over the Brooklyn skyline. We were planning our newest documentary, drinking wine from coffee mugs because we still couldn't afford proper stemware. "Do you ever regret it?" Jake asked quietly. "Walking away from all that money, the connections, the comfort?" I thought about the question carefully, wanting to give an honest answer. "I miss certain things," I admitted. "I miss the ease of not worrying about bills. I miss some family traditions. I even miss my mother sometimes, not who she tried to make me be, but the rare moments when she was just my mum. I leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. But I don't regret choosing this life, choosing authenticity, choosing you, choosing myself. For the first time, I'm living according to my own values instead of someone else's expectations. A year earlier, I had been on the verge of disappearing into a life designed by others. Now, despite the financial struggles and family estrangement, I had found something invaluable, the freedom to determine my own worth and write my own story. The richest people I know now aren't the ones with the biggest bank accounts, I told Jake. They're the ones with the courage to live truthfully, even when it costs them something. I still don't know if my parents will ever truly accept the path I've chosen. Perhaps someday we'll find a way to build a relationship based on who I actually... not who they wanted me to be. Until then, I'm creating a life authentic to my values. One documentary, one relationship, one day at a time. The greatest lesson I've learned is that belonging isn't about fitting into someone else's world. It's about creating a world where you can be fully yourself and surrounding yourself with people who love that person, not despite your perceived flaws, but because of your genuine heart. Have you ever had to choose between meeting others, expectations, and being true to yourself? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest decisions lead to our greatest growth. If my story resonated with you, please subscribe and share with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to rewrite your own ending. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, the most powerful thing you can own isn't wealth or status, but the courage to speak your truth.